So thank you very much. I will start with the closing remarks because Raul has a more sophisticated text on the conference. So thank you very much. I'm really not able to summarize this 3 days conference of us, but I think you do not need to summarize it yet. But what do I take home? This is my question. What do I take home from this conference beside of the memory of excellent papers and very, very inspiring discussions? And I have to confess that I am a sociologist, and as a sociologist and a social historian, I am more interested on why and how than on what happened. So, thinking on the permanent revival, reproduction, and transgression of anti-Semitism, oscillating between the centers and the peripheries, the conference has confronted me with a couple of questions, and let me just make a few points. I think them over in the next 20 years or later. So, first point, the social spaces of anti-Semitism as a discourse, but also as a political performance. And my question would be, what was the social function of this idea and the reproduction of the societal with the help of using and reproducing the anti-Semitic thinking? My second point would be the question of continuities and discontinuities in the representation of anti-Semitism. So I would like to reread the social history of gaze to understand why the observer's gaze always found and identified the Jew's body, the Jewish body. So what is the clue to understand this kind of observing position? My third point can be the form and meaning of anti-Semitism as a traveling idea. Where were the secret paths from Germany to Greece, from Russia to France, from Great Britain to North Africa, or from Poland to Austria? So where were the secret paths of traveling ideas and traveling persons as well? And another question could be, so I'm very, very interested in the return of the bloody, wild, and violent anti-Semitism from the peripheries to the center in the late 1880s, and then during the First World War and after the First War. Did it play a formative role in the emergence of violent attitudes toward Jews within the European societies, so this violent attitude were tend in the last 100 years before? So can we build this kind of analytic framework with the help of analyzing forced migration from the 1880s until the First World War to understand the social attitudes of the European societies toward Jews? And my last point can be, so during on this conference, I was thinking a lot about the interconnection or interplay between the anti-Semites and the Jewish communities. More exactly, I was thinking about the still fancy social historical theory of the so-called social contracts between the non-Jewish and the Jewish ruling elites in the decades of the emancipation. Does this interpretation concept helps us to describe the social changes in Europe in the late 19th and early 20th century, or on the contrary, this is the concept that continuously, probably unintendedly repeats and reproduces the colonial viewpoint in the modern historiography. So I can cite some very, very important authors who still use the framework of social contract between Jews and non-Jews in the history. I think it's a very, very dangerous concept because it doesn't include the lower classes and lower social groups into the social imaginary of these societies. So that's all, and last but not least, I will send you two postcards because we didn't discuss the self-representations of the Jewish communities in the context of memory, and this is they are two postcards. They are marked photos. So both pictures I got from the Jewish Museum in Miami. So both pictures I want to send you, I found in the Jewish Museum in Miami. And the first picture shows a Jewish family, settlers from 1911. And the second picture, also the local history of the Jewry in Miami, the Freedom Rider from 1946. So thank you very much.
No, I really have the most difficult task to try not to bore you when you're already tired and want this thing to end, and also trying to say something that Eva hasn't covered already. But I feel like I want to go to some of the things that have kept returning during the conference. There were some themes, some notions which I thought were found in many of the presentations, and many of the presentations touched upon them. And of course, this is my personal point of view, so many of the things you might disagree with, and I actually, if you're still up to it, I would like to use this as a springboard for a final discussion, if people are interested. So I'm going to try to keep it short, just going through more or less a bullet point list of the things which I found as recurrent themes in the conference, and then open the floor to you for your final comments and final remarks, because I think this was, for me at least, the conference was an excellent opportunity for dialogue, and I've heard some really great discussions in these 3 days. And so for me, I would begin by saying this was the thing I take home most from the event. And I would also like to return to the beginning, to Nathan's presentation, because many of the things that Nathan mentioned in his presentation, his keynote, that wasn't about anti-Semitism, have kept returning in a conference that was dealing with anti-Semitism in different contexts, and particularly one. I think I'm not the only one who's noticed that one notion that of the universal always having the particular in its background, and the particular always having the universal in its background, and this complex interplay between the universal and the particular kept returning in various presentations as a theme. And I think one of the things I can maybe summarize from these was that in the context of the diversity of forms and discussed at the conference, we could notice on the one hand tropes that travel remarkably well between different geographical areas as well as between different groups. We talked about Jews, but also about Chinese, Arabs, blacks in America, and so on. And at the same time, we could also notice specificities of anti-Semitism that are extremely context dependent. Now, I think and for the latter, there seemed to be general agreement that these specificities had little or anything to do with the actual Jewish communities or with the characteristics of the Jewish communities, but they seem to have a lot more to do with the self-representations of the groups performing of the anti-Semites, to put it simply. And I think these two things. On the one hand, this sort of like more generic tropes that travel between different spaces and between different groups, and the specificities that are more related to the self-representations of the group activating a certain form of anti-Semitism need to be seen in this in a dialectical relationship that's extremely important for understanding anti-Semitism. And it's where I think where the periphery helps clarify and nuance a discourse that's too often structured on the basis of the discourse at the center, and the center that's defined rather, I mean, it's constructed rather than a given. And I think the conference has managed to challenge the notion of a center as being one easily identifiable entity. At the same time, one interesting thing that kept coming up is this interplay between popular and elite-driven anti-Semitism, because we often have this notion of anti-Semitism as being, of modern anti-Semitism as being exclusively elite and elite-driven. But at least that was my impression, that in so many contexts, this overlaps and interacts with an already existing tradition of anti-Judaism, of pre-modern anti-Semitism, and that the forms that are created are actually fusions of the two. And I think there's a lot of scope for researching that further. Another thing which came up in Nathan's presentation and then kept coming up all the way to the last panel was this notion of exceptionalism, which needs to be challenged. And I think what I got from it is not, okay, I mean, I've never argued for any kind of exceptionalism of the case study I'm working on of Romania, but on the one hand, this notion of a participation in a cosmopolitan memory of the Holocaust while simultaneously trying to cover up or minimize one's own role in the perpetration of the Holocaust is actually a commonality, a common feature of the periphery, if you will. Because as almost everybody was saying, yes, you know, Spain is exceptional, and Romania is exceptional, and Hungary is exceptional, and Poland is exceptional. Kind of all of them are, and Greece, sorry, I forgot Greece. Greece is exceptional, of course. So this exceptionalism, I think, has a very important political dimension. And I think it has a political dimension that plays a role in how the periphery is defined. Because this is a sort of a refusal of responsibility that is characteristic of the periphery, and that calls for a historiographic reinterpretation of anti-Semitism that puts the periphery, which wants to remain periphery, at the center. Then I will close. I just don't see where I am on this. Yeah, I think one of the things that came up quite clearly is also the complex entanglement of anti-Semitism and colonialism, which it was one of the original intentions of the conference to play on it. I'm very happy of the way it was elaborated on at the conference. And it was interesting to see how Jews are associated with the colonized, the colonizer, and also how they are self-colonizing in certain contexts. I think it was interesting to once again to the associations between anti-Semitism and colonialism appeared, at least to me, much more complex than I originally thought before the conference. And I had, for example, never taken into consideration this self-colonizing aspect, which came out quite clearly in one of the presentations. I think again to one of Nathan's distinctions in the keynote lecture. I keep returning to the beginning, and I said I will do that, of the Holocaust as having this tripartite meaning of one being about Jews and about anti-Semitism, two being about racism and about difference and otherness, and three being a crime against humanity. So there's three levels at which we can see the memory of the Holocaust playing out. And similarly, I think one of the things which came out, at least for me, in the interplay between anti-Semitism and colonialism at the conference, was a way to look at anti-Semitism according to a similar distinction. One that has to do with the uniqueness, alleged uniqueness and particularity of the Jews as a group. Another one that has to do with radical otherness, and that's where the Jews come where the tropes are quite similar between Jews and other groups. And third, as an instantiation of general prejudice. And here's where you can make sense of notions of anti-Semitism against non-Jews and stuff like that. Finally, all of this happens in a globalizing context. I think most of the presentations pointed out the importance of globalization in the spread and the travel of anti-Semitic tropes. It's not exactly universal, or maybe not the same thing as universal, but I think globalization is very important to keep in mind for the specific period in question. And globalization also has to do with an uneven pace of modernization in different spaces. And the uneven pace of modernization instead translates in the coexistence, I think, and interpenetration of different temporal registers, which is why you have pre-modern forms of pre-modern anti-Judaism coexisting and interacting with modern anti-Semitism. And the results are, I think, also to be interpreted along the lines of the different paces of modernization. I think it would be important to position our case studies, I think, in a global context, also in view of the different pace of modernization. Finally, another thing, not finally, I just want two more things. One is the overlap and intersections between class, ethnicity, gender, and nationality. I think we tend to treat anti-Semitism very much as a matter of ethnicity or religion, and to look. And by doing so, I think we take the identifications of the anti-Semites for granted. And I think many of the presentations nuance that by introducing elements such as class, occupation, gender, and so on into the narrative. And I think it allows for a much more nuanced narrative on anti-Semitism and of anti-Semitism and the ways in which it played out in certain contexts. And finally, and that's absolutely a choice to finish with that, because it's sort of my little obsession and my hobby horse, this notion of anti-Semitism as a proxy, and which, so as a cultural code, as a proxy, as a means to target other groups. And I think that's where there's a lot of work, I think, still to be done on the functions that anti-Semitism performs in terms of power, and in terms of nexuses of knowledge and power, and in what ways this anti-Semitism represented a political claim that might not have had anything to do with the Jews, but it did have to do with existing and challenging structures of power. And those would be my thoughts. And
you will come. You will come. You have to close the discussion. Do we have time to discuss? Oh. Okay. Nathan wants to. I will come to you.
Okay, thank you. So I open, and maybe I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to maybe almost close as well. And thank you for this wonderful conference. That was really great, and I enjoyed it. But I also had some thoughts which also connect to what I said in the beginning, that I had arguments with Robert Wistrich about how academic research on anti-Semitism can actually be. And I remember a quote, I think it's Isaiah Berlin, who said that Jews are like other people, only a little bit more so. And I think that one of the problems of the research on anti-Semitism is that anti-Semites want to show that Jews are just like other people, but they're actually not. They are not like other people, otherwise they wouldn't be Jews. They would be like other people. So there is this problem that on the one hand you want Jews to be like other people, but you want to keep Jews to continue being Jewish. And that reminds me of a wonderful essay which is at the same time anti-Semitic and at the same time also anti-anti-Semitic, which is an essay written by Karl Marx a long time ago on the Jewish question. Where in the first part of that essay, Marx argued that Jews are too universal to be particular. And in the second part of the essay, he argued that Jews are too particular to be universal. And that the only solution for the Jewish problem is to do away with the Jews. But he didn't say that as an anti-Semite, he said that as an anti-anti-Semite. So I think that what needs to be done in many ways in the research on anti-Semitism is to look also on anti-anti-Semitism, which means that the research on anti-Semitism has to be more self-reflexive. Why is it what we do? What do we want to do with that? What does it mean to be Jewish? So you always study anti-Jewish stereotypes which have nothing to do with the Jews, you assume. You always show, and somehow, I mean, over the last 3 days, I sometimes wasn't sure if I'm listening to academic lectures or if I'm listening to the arguments of the Abwehrvereine gegen den Antisemitismus, which were so prevalent in the 19th century. And I think we can get over that and have to take into account also real Jews, because real Jews didn't show up. Because in the research of anti-Semitism, you don't deal with Jews. You deal with perceptions of Jews. So I think that you need to combine research on anti-Semitic sentiments with research on anti-Semitic sentiments and bring in the Jews again into the equation, because they were lacking, they were absent. And I don't think you can have a conference on anti-Semitism without Jews. So you're falling into the same trap that Bauer was falling into in the 19th century, and that Marx was trying to answer him in his kind of combination between anti-Semitism and anti-anti-Semitism. Okay, thanks.
We accepted this. So this was the reason why I wanted to show these two pictures: a real settler and a real communist living a non-anti-Semitic vicinity. So it's also interesting that it still exists, or the question is, it still exists a society, a subculture, a cultural code without anti-Semitism.
And I would also add something. I think, I mean, although I would always argue that that anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic stereotypes have nothing to do with the communities themselves, it is vital to keep in mind that their consequences do have something to do with the communities, because they get played out on those communities. So I don't think Jews were absent from this conference. I think in discussing how the representation of the Jew was constructed, you always imply what that construction eventually meant. And I think in the text of describing the conference, as well as in many of the presentations, the Holocaust was omnipresent as the endpoint of what anti-Semitism came to represent. So I personally, while trying to disentangle anti-Semitic discourse from the Jewish communities in terms of their target group, and of course you're absolutely right, the beautiful Karl Marx formulation of too particular and to be universal and too universal to be particular, but I think it's also very important to keep in mind that this does have an effect on actual Jews, and I don't think any of us has any doubts about that, at least from what I got from the presentations. And in this respect, yes, I see your call for more reflection on anti-Semitism.
But you can also respond.
Yeah. But if people don't want to have a final discussion, let's just close it.
Yeah, I was thinking about what you just said. One of the original questions that led me to research the dissertation that transformed into the book that I published a number of years ago was precisely this question about the relationship between Jews in Germany and anti-Semitism through the framework of colonialism and the colonial empire. As I discovered in the early 2000s when I was finishing my coursework at Rutgers University to get my PhD, one of the fascinating aspects of German colonialism in the late 19th and early 20th centuries was that German Jews and individuals who were identified as Jewish played very important roles in the construction and the maintenance of the colonial states that Germany built beginning in the mid-1880s. And the question that I asked, which led to the project which turns into the dissertation in the book, was, well, given the prominent place that Jews and Germans of Jewish descent and individuals identified by others as Jewish played in Germany's colonial project, and given the identification of the colonial project as this ultra-nationalist project in Germany, how did anti-Semites respond to that, given that anti-Semites identified themselves as being ultra-nationalists and ethnic nationalists and German patriots? So in the work that I've done, I've looked precisely at that question, the relationship between anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic forces in the anti-Semitic movement in late 19th and early 20th century Germany, and Jews and Germans of Jewish descent and individuals perceived as Jews who, as a result of their heightened public position in Germany, were really at the center of these two projects, the anti-Semitic project aimed against them and aimed against the forces that anti-Semites believed they represented, and also this project to colonize Africa and other parts of the world. So in my own work, I've tried to bring this together in a way that I think you suggest needs to be done.
Do you want to close?
No more questions. Everybody is hungry.
Everybody's hungry. I promise I'm going to be very short because everybody's fed up with anti-Semitism and anti-Semitism, and you really want to have some food, and we prepared a little bit of a business lunch outside for a farewell. So I'm going to be really, as I promised, very short, and there are more and more organizational things I want to bring up now. First of all, as you know, Austria belongs to the Germanic fraction within the European Union, so this government wants to save money and imposes saving money on the rest of Europe. So regarding the travel costs, I still cannot promise anything. I ask you to keep the receipts. We will try to calculate, and maybe we find a solution that at least you get a lump sum or something like a little bit of a support for your travel costs. I'm optimistic, but don't promise anything. Second, I want to remind you, I want to draw your attention that in your conference folders there is a call for fellowships. I would love if you apply for that. I think you have time until the end of January to write a proposal which will be then evaluated by our International Academic Advisory Board. Third, I would like to very much publish the results of this conference. I think Raul and Eva agree with me, and I hope they let me participate in editing it. So what we ask for is, I think within the next weeks you will get a circular letter by us giving the parameters. I think it's about 60,000 characters. I don't know exactly, but we will write that. I think we will wait for the manuscripts until the beginning of summer. We will discuss that, but you will have sufficient time to write your articles. I would like to very much to have this book as soon as possible. You have one edition already outside. This is our first book on our first Simon Wiesenthal conference, which was 4 years ago, but we really want to speed up now the production time. Finally, something else. When you leave this conference venue, I also want to draw the attention to you to a square, the place where we left for the Heurigen, outside in front of the opera, with a monument on it. It's the Monument Against War and Fascism, a highly contested monument within the city, but an Austrian visual artist, Ruth Beckermann, has added a visual installation to it, which reminds us as one of the darkest parts of the Viennese history. You see in a small clipping on a footage which was found coincidentally in a private household, a terrified woman looking into the camera while being forced by the Nazi mob to clean the city's pavement of Austro-fascism propaganda. So I simply ask you to look at it, that you are reminded that the topic of our conference is also related to something which happened in the city and was a disgrace for the city and for the history of this city. Now I come to the official closing ceremony. I know this is a kind of an empty ritual to say thank you at the end. I don't want to become it an empty ritual. So first of all, I'd like to thank Eva and Raul for preparing and with my also little support this conference academically. I'm very grateful for this conference, but especially I want to thank you. I was really happy with just as Raul put it too, with the discussions we had. For me as a managing director, these conferences also are a little bit, always a little bit of a returning to academia, and I enjoyed it very much. I learned a lot. I take away with me a lot of new input for the next academic academic events of this institute. So again, thank you very much. Especially though, finally, and would you bring Greta in? I would like to thank my team. As a managing director, I think one always tends to forget that it's a lot of work, a lot of creativity to kind of produce this atmosphere around the conference, which I think is so significant, so characteristic for the Simon Wiesenthal conference. So I want to thank the team, Barbara Gzelakova, Jana Starek, Philip Rohrbach and Sandro Fasching for preparing this, and especially I want to thank Greta, who is really in charge for the whole atmosphere of this conference around. So the chocolate goes for the team because they are very much in chocolate, and the flowers go to Greta. Okay. And now let's go to the sandwiches. And I took off my tie.